One of the most commonly agreed upon theories in the Five Nights at Freddy's community is the theory that Mike Schmidt, the protagonist of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, is Michael Afton, the protagonist of Sister Location and FNaF 6. However, ever since the FNaF movie came out with Mike Schmidt as the protagonist, and he wasn't William Afton's son, or well, we don't know that for sure, he still could be, but as of now, he is not confirmed to be, I've seen a surprising amount of people say that Mike Schmidt is also not Michael Afton in the games. Like, I've seen people say, oh, it was never confirmed in the games that Mike Schmidt is Afton's son. And honestly, it kind of confuses me because Mike being Mike is a theory with such hard evidence that I think it's just one of the things that we should maybe accept as fact. And I don't really say that about any other theories, I believe, except like, I don't know, maybe Will Trap. So join me as I clear up something that we should have all agreed upon a long time ago. And not only that, but I'll explain why Michael is the FNaF 4 protagonist as well, since I know the community consensus is still that we play as the crying child during the nighttime segments. And I've always wanted to make a video about that too. And it does rely on Michael being Mike Schmidt, so may as well just throw it in here. Before we delve into these very likely theories, I just want to really quickly ask you guys to subscribe. I'm trying to hit 3K before the end of the year, and subscribe would help me out a ton, but only if you enjoy the video. If you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can. So, what is the evidence for Mike being Mike? Holy shit, this is gonna get confusing. Well, there's the name for one. Mike is a nickname for Michael, and you'll never guess what the protagonist of Sister Location's name is. What's important to remember is that at the time of Sister Location's release, there are only 3 named characters in the game's storyline. Mike Schmidt, Jeremy Fitzgerald, and Fritz Smith. I guess we can count William too, even though he wasn't officially named until Sister Location. I find it extremely unlikely that the protagonist of FNaF 1 sharing the name as the protagonist of Sister Location is a coincidence. There's also no way Jeremy and Fritz being the name of the MCI victims is a coincidence either, but that's besides the point. But Zero, he calls himself Michael, not Mike. Yeah, this is something people actually use to try and debunk the theory. You're right, he does, but this doesn't matter, like, at all. Since we see on hand unit the name Mike, and Michael is told to enter his name as seen above the keypad. I mean, the implication is pretty clear. I'm surprised that, okay, this is like a whole rant, this is totally off script. I'm genuinely so surprised that the player of Sister Location being Mike Schmidt was not like the most popular like opinion after that fucking scene. I know there are definitely people who thought like the player character was Mike, but there were people who thought that it was like totally different person, or that it was like fucking some weird Michael Brooks. There's also the idea that William was Mike Schmidt and this whole thing. I'm genuinely just so surprised. Like, there are definitely people who put it together, don't get me wrong, but I'm surprised it just didn't take off more, man. I just had to like get that out there. And in the Five Nights at Freddy's Survival Logbook, we see that the book is owned by someone named Mike, who is undoubtedly Michael Afton. So yeah, he goes by Mike too, who would have fucking guessed. But wait, Michael Brooks, I hear you say. In case you don't know, in the novel trilogy, there's a character named Michael Brooks, who possesses Golden Freddy. So at the time of Sister Location's release, Scott has already named multiple characters Mike/Michael, but the Silver Eyes is a different continuity from the games. It's also possible that Scott was trying to connect the name Michael to Golden Freddy because of FNaF 4, but I'll talk about that later. Maybe Brooks is like some weird adaptation of Michael Afton. That could explain why the Golden Freddy's kid's name is changed in the games, because he isn't Golden Freddy, but probably not. He probably just changed it because it would be weird to have the main character also be the name of one of the missing kids. Zato, wait, he didn't change the name Jeremy and Fritz for the MCI victims? Yeah, I wonder if there's like a deeper connection between Jeremy and Fritz sharing the names with the security guards. You should watch my Jeremy and Fritz video. Or maybe it's all just a coincidence. Although if Brooks' name being Michael is a coincidence, that doesn't mean Mike Afton being named Mike is one, since I'm sure if Sky's making an entry in the game's timeline, in the game story, he'll be thinking about that story's characters. And again, there are only 3 named characters in the game before Sister Location, but that's not all. Sister Location was made in part to explain FNaF 4's story.
Other ones, yeah, there were mysteries. 4 ended up just too mysterious to the point where you really couldn't, there was no real way to figure out what was going on. And a lot of people unsatisfied. And like I said, with jumping from 3 to 4, I knew that I had to go in and straighten that out. It's like, people aren't really happy with this. I need to make another game. I need to kind of ground this again, not necessarily in reality, but I need to ground it in kind of storytelling.
And here's what a lot of people may not know. Mike Schmidt was already an important part of FNaF 4's story. In fact, he was our player. Now, to a lot of people who watch my channel regularly, you're probably already like, yeah, no shit. But I know the community at large still thinks that in FNaF 4, we play as the crying child from the minigames during the nightmares. But this is most likely incorrect, and has been since the game came out. No, it was not a fucking retcon, I'll get to that later. And it all comes down to this audio file heard in game. This is actually Ralph's phone call from FNaF 1 Night 1. And Scott Cawthon himself said that there were no random Easter eggs, meaning this has lore significance. Oh, but wait, wasn't FNAF 4's original story Dream Theory before Scott retconned it, and this was just another hint to the theory? Yeah, well, it probably fucking wasn't, because it seems very likely that Dream Theory was never Scott's original intention with Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and I've made an entire video going over that, so make sure to check that out for further clarification. So if Dream Theory isn't canon, then that means this audio file, which however we know has some level of importance, must have a different meaning. The player must have heard it, and there's only two people we know of at this point who would have heard this call, Ralph or Mike Schmidt. Ralph is fucking dead, and we know from the week before that he doesn't have the nightmares. Also, it would be weird to play as him in FNAF 4 since he's not related to the story at all, so that leaves Mike Schmidt. And how does Mike Schmidt play into the story? Well, he can't be the crying child since he died years before FNAF 1. Yes, he died years before FNAF 1, so that means Mike has to be someone else, and probably the older brother. The player is clearly put in the position of a child, probably connected to the child we play as in the minigames. I mean, obviously the minigames are going to be connected to the plot of the game, which would make sense if the protag bullied a child, which eventually led to that child's death, and, you know, he felt guilt over it, so then in their nightmares, they are put in the position of a child being tormented, bullied, by the animatronics which mirrored the masked bullies. I mean, sure, he could technically be any of the bullies, or anyone else, I guess, but come on, guys, I don't need hard evidence to prove he's the brother. There are just some gaps that we should be able to logically fill in ourselves. Also, like, why would the player be some rando and not the second most important character in the minigames? Further evidence for the player being Mike Schmidt is that FNAF 4's gameplay mirrors FNAF 1. Nightmare Fredbear is also one of the final bosses in this game, which admittedly works well with the crying child being the player, but if it's the older brother, then he is facing his guilt head on, as he is facing the thing that killed his brother. Also, consider this, the nightmare continues after the crying child's death. He dies in the Night 6 minigame, but there are 8 nights in the game. At this point, the game can't be a coma or whatever since he is dead. Why continue the game if the protagonist has died, unless he didn't actually die because he wasn't the protagonist? So, when FNAF 4 came out, we were playing as Mike Schmidt, who is the older brother facing probably guilt-ridden nightmares. Oh, and Shadow Freddy is there too. Watch my FNAF 4 video. Now you might be wondering, why would Scott make it so we play as Mike in FNAF 4? Why suddenly give this character relevance? Well, more relevance outside of being the first playable character in the series, I guess. And what's the narrative purpose of playing as him? Well, there are a couple possible reasons. FNAF 4 was made to be the final game in the series, so it's possible Scott just wanted to call back to the beginning by having us play as Mike again, and then he gave him this origin story to justify it, you know, really try and bring it full circle type of thing. Now, personally, if I was in Scott's position, I would have just made the FNAF 3 guard be the player, since that guy was left unnamed in the previous game. You can do basically anything with him, and he was the one who went up against the killer. There's also the Happiest Day plotline, which is heavily connected to the crying child, so the crying child is plot relevant to that game, and I also do believe the William was the father of Foxy Bro and the crying child, so it would be like a family reunion of sorts, but whatever. Maybe Mike is the FNAF 3 guard, who knows. As for the story reason we play as him, it really depends on your interpretation of FNAF 4's story. What I think is most likely going on is that the crying child's memories went on to influence the rest of the story, and in the gameplay Mike is haunted by the memory of his brother and his guilt of killing him. It basically just further explores the idea of his memories leaving an effect. But I explained all this more in depth in my Dream Theory video. And all of this is just using FNAF 4. There's more evidence after the game's release. There's Sister Location, which was made after people were unsatisfied and confused with FNAF 4's storytelling. One of the first things we learn in this game is that our player character is named Mike. It's almost like Mike was an important character in the last game, but no one understood it, so he calls it out right at the beginning of Sister Location that Mike is important to this story. And as we know, we play as Mike Afton in this game, which just rounds back to Mike Afton being Mike Schmidt. And in the Five Nights at Freddy's Survival Logbook, which was previously owned by Michael Afton, he draws Nightmare Fredbear after being asked about recent dreams. Furthermore, in the movie, Mike Schmidt has dreams related to his brother. He also feels guilt for his brother's death. Very similar to Michael Afton, who also feels guilt for his brother's death. Maybe he had dreams related to his brother too. So yeah, it seems very likely that Mike Schmidt is the FNAF 4 player and is Michael Afton. Also, can we just like stop this whole thing? I see this thing where people are like, well, maybe Mike is only the player on night 5, 6, 7, and 8. No, dude, the phone call is on every night. You know, he's the player for every night, alright? Hey guys, there's actually one more piece of evidence I forgot to talk about for why Mike Schmidt is Michael Afton. So this is something that's gone pretty much unnoticed, but might have gotten popularity recently thanks to Hyperdroid. Basically, the Toradora March plays during Demolition Inevitable, which is the song that plays during Mike's speech at the end of Sister Location. So let me get this straight. There's this scene that's all about Mike and his journey, and then there's the Toradora March that plays. I wonder what that could be implying, guys. What could that mean? The implication, I think, is pretty clear. Now, there is one last thing I have to talk about. If Mike Afton is Mike Schmidt, why isn't Mike in Afton in the movies? Oh, I guess I should also talk about why Mike would change his last name to Schmidt in FNaF 1. It could just be like that's his legal name now, or like he's just trying to like be, you know, disassociated from his father is probably what was going on there. As for why he's not in Afton in the movies, well, I don't know. Scott probably just wanted to change it to tell a different story. Things change in adaptations all the time, and either way, Mike Schmidt is still an adaptation of Michael Afton's character. It's just showing his life under different circumstances. And it makes sense for his last name to be Schmidt in the movies if he isn't in Afton, since that's the last name he used in the games. Hell, even if another character is introduced and he is named Michael Afton, it doesn't mean Mike Schmidt and Michael Afton are separate in the games. Scott would just be splitting up the characters, basically, which is another thing that happens in adaptations. I know Matthew Lillard said the movies fill in blanks from the game's story, but that doesn't necessarily mean everything is gonna line up. And Mike Schmidt being Mike Afton is one of the most commonly agreed upon theories, so it's possible Scott would change it and trust the community wouldn't get the wrong idea. Scott should never trust the community, is what this video is really about. So, what do you guys think? Is Mike Schmidt Michael Afton the FNaF 4 player? 99% of you are going to agree. UCN released in 2018, and immediately the story of this game, which shouldn't really have had a story, was speculated on. From whether the protagonist was William or Mike, to who the vengeful spirit is, and what the cutscenes meant, almost every detail of this game was speculated on, except for one, where the game actually took place. When UCN released, the common consensus was that this game took place in some kind of hell or purgatory. I mean, there's a reason the theories were called Will Hell and Mike Hell. However, over time, it seems that this consensus was wrong. It was first called into question when the Fazbear Frights story, The Man in Room 1280, released and showed a situation where William Afton was kept in endless nightmare by a spirit who he killed and was angry. This is pretty similar to UCN, and it seemed to pretty much confirm that UCN was a nightmare, since Scott said the book series would give us answers even if they weren't the ones we wanted. Hey, this statement could probably apply to a few characters now that I'm thinking about it. However, even years after this story has come out, there are still people who think UCN was William Afton's hell, and I can't really blame them. In the community, the books, especially the Fazbear Frights books, are considered a separate continuity, which is pretty fair to think. And because of that, some of the details are not taken into account, like how in the books, UCN is a nightmare. But what if I told you that UCN was always a nightmare? It was heavily hinted at in the game itself. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's look at some of the voice lines in UCN that hint towards this. They all pretty much come from the character Nightmare On. These lines are pretty self-explanatory. The first one is saying the protagonist is in the beginning of a nightmare, and the second one is saying the protagonist is in a nightmare that he can't wake from. Let's take a look at another line. This time, death cannot save you. This line implies the protagonist can't actually die and isn't dead. Also, this line says death won't save him, kind of like it has in the past. But I'll admit, this line can kind of work under the hell theory, since the protagonist wouldn't be dying, they would already be dead. Now, I'll admit, these lines have a problem of all coming from the same character, who is heavily connected to nightmares himself, but that's alright because there's better evidence. The titles of the song and the soundtrack basically spell out that UCN is a nightmare. It's kind of funny. We have titles like Sleep No More, Where Dreams Die, or my personal favorite, Hibernating Evil. I mean, come on, it's kind of obvious. Now, there's titles such as Last Breath, and when you have your last breath, you die. An easy way to explain this title is that the protagonist is constantly having their last breath, since they're being kept alive in this nightmare, where they die repeatedly. You can also hear William breathing at the end of this song. Now, there is one line in UCN that is pretty good evidence towards it being hell, and this line comes from Jack Chica of all characters. Usually people associate burning in fire for all eternity with, you know, hell. However, this line can be kind of explained under the dream theory, since the protagonist would be basically in hell. They just, you know, aren't literally there, but, you know, they're dying over and over. It's their own personal hell. And, well, that's all the evidence for UCN being a nightmare and not the afterlife, or purgatory. That is the afterlife. Overall, I'd say this is a pretty good theory and is basically confirmed by Fazbear Frights, which, even if you don't think are in the game's continuity, were said to clear things up from the past games. And then there's a whole story where William is kept alive in a nightmare by a vengeful spirit, and then you look at UCN and you find a soundtrack titled fucking Hibernating Evil, and you should be able to put the pieces together. Recently, the fan favorite book, Escape the Pizzaplex, was released. Despite this book focusing on Gregory and Cassie, two of our protagonists in the new Five Nights at Freddy's arc, the book contained no lore. It was too focused on reagent, I guess. And this is very disappointing, for obvious reasons. Although, I guess I should say it had almost no lore, because there is one minor thing in this book that could have some implications for the lore, and has been justifiably overlooked by the community. And it might just answer one of the biggest debates left behind by the original storyline. As we know, Escape the Pizzaplex is supposed to be an interactive novel, or a choose-your-own-adventure book. Now, the book is mostly a linear story with no branching paths outside of deaths, but let's just ignore that for now. In these types of books, you often pick up items that you will be able to use later in the book. Maybe a key to unlock a door, things like that. Or you can do what I do and just pick the path anyway, even if you don't have the item. Anyway, Escape the Pizzaplex has collectible items as well, and one of them is what I want to talk about today. While Cassie's hiding from Freddy, she can go to a reception desk. You need to go back to the raceway and find a better hiding spot to hide from Freddy. But as you go to do so, something in the pile of scattered garbage catches your eye. You pick away at the empty wrappers and discarded soda cans to uncover a keychain. Strangely, it's a Bonnie keychain you've never seen before. You thought you'd seen most of the prizes and souvenirs that Pizzaplex had to offer, but this one is new to you, even though it looks old and well used. Still, it's cool, so you grab it and put it in your bag. And what is the item? It's a Bonnie toy, and not only that, but it looks like the Bonnie toy seen in FNaF 3. This alone really wouldn't mean much. This is the Pizzaplex after all, and they have plenty of items from the previous games, but it is specifically called out to be something Cassie has never seen before, and it's old and well used. It's also been modified to be a keychain for some reason. I think the implication here is that it's the same Bonnie toy from FNaF 3. What with it being called out to be old, and something Cassie has never seen before, meaning it's not just common Pizzaplex merch. And I haven't seen anyone talk about this besides myself, but I can't really blame anyone. When this book came out, all of us were more focused on the important things. Well, as important something like a FNaF book can be. Talking about the book having poor writing, it not even being a good interactive novel, and overall the book just being wasted potential. So yeah, something minor like this would slip by, but can't slip past me. I will always overthink any FNaF 3 content. I think that should be obvious. And I've definitely overthought this, and it's time for me to share my overthinking with all of you, and we can be like overthinkers together. But before we overthink this, I just have one thing to ask you guys, and that is that you subscribe, because I'm trying to hit 3K before the end of the year. And I know 91% of you aren't subscribed, so come on, just hit that red button and help me out. You can always undo it later. Let's talk about who this keychain may have belonged to. I think it may have been Cassie's dad, which I know sounds like a huge leap, but please hear me out. Cassie's dad is already connected to Bonnie, because Bonnie is his favorite character, and Cassie is the protagonist of this book, so her father is already sort of related to the book. I mean, he's also mentioned in it. The Bonnie keychain is also old Freddy's merch, and we know Cassie's dad collects old Freddy's merchandise, so I don't think it's a stretch to connect the keychain to Cassie's dad. He also did work at the Pizzaplex. Now, I should note that the keychain is used in Bonnie Bowl, so it's possible the connection doesn't go any deeper than that. You know, it's used in the Bonnie area, so it's Bonnie. But still, I think that's kind of strange that it's specifically based on the toy in FNaF 3, especially since Freddy, which is a toy we know for sure was sold at the Fazbear Frights auction, would have survived the fire, would have also made sense considering Glamrock Freddy's and Glamrock Bonnie's close relationship. So I think it's more than likely this keychain belongs to Cassie's dad. And there are definitely problems with this idea. For one, if it was his and it was part of his collection, why didn't Cassie recognize it? In Ruin, she calls out the lunchboxes are things her dad collects, so she probably knows about his collection. Well, I mean, obviously she knows about it, but you know what I mean. The only answer I can think of is that since it's a keychain, maybe she never saw it or took notice of it. Or maybe he just kept it at work, I'm not sure. That definitely is a problem though. And why is it in the trash? Why would he throw it out? Well, it's possible that maybe he has bad memories attached to this thing, or he was just trying to get rid of it so people can use it. Maybe he even threw it away on accident, or more realistically, it was just convenient for the book. Even with these problems, I do think the keychain most likely belongs to Cassie's dad for the reasons I spoke about earlier. Now that we've determined the keychain most likely belongs to Cassie's dad, let's talk about what this could be implying. I think it could be connecting Cassie's dad to FNaF 3 for sure, and Fazbear's Fright in particular. I know it's possible he could have just bought the toy from the auction, but since it's never cut out to be burnt, which it logically should be if it was in a fire, that implies that whoever has it probably just took it from the Fazbear's Fright security office. So this, at least to me, points towards Cassie's dad working at Fazbear's Fright, which makes a lot of sense. We know he's a fan of Freddy's. Why wouldn't he want to work at Fazbear's Fright? And do you want to know what's strange? This isn't even the first time Cassie's dad has been connected to FNaF 3. In Help Wanted 2, on the back of his Faz wrench is the code 395428, the same code used in FNaF 3 to access the Stage 01 minigame. At first I thought this may just be connecting Cassie's dad to Fredbear's, further solidifying him being the Bonnie bully, but if this keychain really is his, then maybe the connection runs deeper and it's connecting him to FNaF 3 in general. And you know what? And I've talked about this before, but Help Wants to in general kind of parallels FNaF 3. There's 2 endings, well now there's technically 3, but when the game released there were 2, both of which are arguably canon, and to unlock the secret endings of both games you must complete minigames and do hidden things to unlock what you need to do for the secret ending. And the memory dolls in Help Wanted 2 resemble the ghosts of the missing children in FNaF 3, both of them donning masks of the characters they possess. Hell, both endings even set them free. FNaF 3 they are literally set free, and in Help Wanted 2's Old Vanny dialogue it is said we were setting the memories free. Not only that, but when you redo the steps to get the memory dolls, you get a piece of cake. And in FNaF 3's Happiest Day minigames, you collect mainly cake and then set it down for the Golden Freddy Kid in the end. Also, to unlock one of the memory dolls, you have to unlock a secret Fazbear Blast level based on FNaF 3. Now, who is the protagonist of Help Wanted 2? Cassie's dad. So it's totally possible that Cassie's dad is connected to FNaF 3 in some way, and he'd probably be working at Fazbear's Fright if they're bothering to connect him to the game that much. And there's really only 2 people he can be. The FNaF 3 guard, or phone dude. I mean, technically he can just be some random worker, but I don't see why this would be brought up so much if he wasn't someone with a little more importance. Let's talk about the guard first, since I've talked about this idea before. Him being the guard would make sense, and the evidence is there, as I talked about earlier. The keychain, the 395428 code, and Help Wanted 2's parallels to FNaF 3. There's also the theory of Cassie's dad being the arcade conspirator in Security Breach, and the theory of the security guard in FNaF 3 setting up Happiest Day, which is played on arcades. If both these theories are true, then that's another connection between the characters. They both play haunted arcade games. Cassie's dad being the guard is a very solid theory, and escape the Pizzaplex just makes it more likely by further connecting him to the game, possibly. However, I'm pretty certain Cassie's dad is not the guard. I think it's more likely that it's Michael or Hudson. And if you want to know why, make sure to check out my video going over the identity of the FNaF 3 guard. I put a lot of work into it. I'm also making a video on the survival logbook, which plays into all of this, so make sure to be on the lookout for that. But these 2 characters are just more likely to be the guard than Cassie's dad in my opinion. Although I do think him being the guard would make sense, and it would explain why his FNaF 3 connections keep coming up time and again, since the FNaF 3 guard is a pretty heated debate in the community right now, so it could be Scott's rule of clarification playing out. Also, Cassie's dad being the guard makes sense with FNaF 3's narrative, and it would make the game a bit more personal, don't you think? Cassie's dad is a huge fan of Freddy's. The childhood characters which brought him joy are now attacking him night after night, and one of the men who created the franchise he loves so much is coming to kill him. And in the end, he feels the need to burn the place down. It just makes for a more personal game and more of a psychological horror experience, which I prefer. And if Cassie's dad is the Bonnie Bully, which he most likely is, he would be connected with the Happiest Day plotline as well, since it's very likely the crying child is connected to that, and he helped kill the crying child. But we can't use narrative satisfaction to prove a theory, obviously. And it doesn't matter anyway, since Mike being the guard makes for a better story, but I digress. Anyway, I think if we get something a little more concrete, then I'll probably believe Cassie's dad is the guard. Like if we get a Fazbear's Fright level in 5 laps at Freddy's, and if it has a Bonnie plush in the office, something like that. So if he isn't the guard, then by process of elimination, he is probably Phone Dude. We don't know enough about Phone Dude or Cassie's dad as people to really talk about hardcore evidence for them being the same person, but we know that Cassie's dad's a fan of Freddy's, and Phone Dude seems pretty enthusiastic about Fazbear's Fright. So it's definitely possible that he's a fan of the Freddy's franchise. And this is cool world building, I guess. Not exactly sure why he would be Phone Dude, but it's a harmless thing, so who can really complain? I guess it makes sense with how this new arc seems to be mainly about the effects left behind by the Afton story. So it makes sense to have side characters from that story arc as main characters, so we can see how the events affected them. But he already fulfills that as the Bonnie Bully, so I don't know. Also, he kind of parallels Ralph, I guess, since, Ralph had a daughter, Cassie's dad has a daughter. Yeah, that's how they parallel each other. So to recap, Cassie's dad has been connected to FNaF 3, and Escape the Pizzaplex may have just made another connection. So he is probably connected to FNaF 3, and he probably worked at Fazbear's Fright. He realistically would probably be the guard or Phone Dude. He probably isn't the guard, so he's probably Phone Dude. Recently, the public playtesting beta for Springtrap and Dead by Daylight was released, and I don't know if it was good or not, I can't play it. However, what was surprising is that this collab does seem to have some lore implications for, Five Nights at Freddy's. Most of them are really minor, to be honest, but there is one thing that might finally confirm one of FNaF's most debated minigames takes place. This collab also fleshes out the character of William Afton in the game's timeline, which I will talk about as well. But before we get into all that, we should probably talk about the most important question first. Can we even use this collab for lore? And to that, I'd say yes, most likely. As the devs have stated over and over again that they have worked very closely with Scott, and most likely everything related to Springtrap and FNaF in general in this collab has to, be approved by Scott. And Springtrap's bio lines up with the games pretty well, and while yes, Springtrap here is technically taken from a different continuity than the games, it is still pretty much the games. It's more of like a branching off point. There's a timeline where everything happens as it does in game, and there's a timeline where William is taken by the entity. So while there is no direct confirmation at this time, I do think we can most likely use this collab for lore, which we should start talking about. Before we talk about William's bio, let's talk about the add-ons. In case you've never played Dead by Daylight before, there are add-ons that can be used with the killers and survivors, and they have a couple sentences attached to them, kind of explaining what they are. Most of William's aren't that interesting, but there are a few I want to talk about. One of Springtrap's add-ons is the party hat, with the description, "The party never ends, no matter how much they beg." Now there's a couple ways to interpret this. You could say this is referring to the survivors in Dead by Daylight, and the party is, the gameplay pretty much. Obviously it isn't literally a party, but it basically is for William. Another way you could interpret this is that it's actually a reference to the missing children. In the book Return to the Pit, Pizzaplex, who is not literally William, but whatever, puts party hats on the missing children to kind of mess with their minds, if I remember correctly. I don't know, I'm not rereading the book for the fucking DBD lore video, dude. So this could be a reference to that. Maybe keeping the children in a false happiest day, I don't know. Another add-on is the office phone. It's just a reference to Ralph, which is cool. An add-on that I find interesting is the security guard badge, which has a description, "This badge comes with certain privileges for whoever carries it." I think this add-on is supposed to be a reference to FNaF 2, where William wore a security guard badge during the game. What I find interesting is that it says it has certain privileges. I think this is referencing how William was able to get away with his crimes in that game because of his position as a guard. He was able to kind of say like, "Oh, I don't know anything about that," kind of thing. I just find this interesting because Scott never references FNaF 2, so it's kind of cool. The next one I want to talk about is Freddy's hat. Gabriel trusted the wrong grown-up, and now he's the star of the show. This is just further confirmation that the gravestones at the end of FNaF 6 do line up with, the FNaF 3 ending. I think this one is pretty cool because this franchise doesn't really use the names of the characters that much, so actually hearing the kid who possesses Freddy's name is pretty cool, I think. The next add-on is the purple guy drawing, which says he takes 10 seconds to draw. Just a neat reference to FNaF World. And the final add-on to talk about is the Remnant add-on, with the description, "Molten metal. In the right hands, it's the key to immortality." And I think it does imply that William's motivations in the games, with his experiments at least, is actually trying to figure out immortality, which I think we've all agreed on, but it's still cool to get an explicit mention of it. Now let's talk about the main thing here, Springtrap's bio, because it is pretty interesting. But before I get into that, I just want to ask you guys to subscribe. I'm trying to hit 3K before the end of the year, and subscribing will be a massive help. And if you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can. Anyway, Springtrap's bio reads, "Deep within the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, William Afton ran from the ghosts of his victims. He frantically put on his beloved Spring Bonnie costume, the disguise he wore while committing his heinous crimes, to hide from the pursuing spirits. But fate had different plans for Afton. Something activated the spring locks within the Spring Bonnie costume. Metal clamped against metal, piercing the murderer and trapping him in his costume. As he screamed, the checkerboard floor rose up to meet him, and everything went black. Thus Springtrap was born, from the death of a murderer. He awoke to a familiar sound, his body a pillar of agony. The ghosts that had tormented him were gone. The walls surrounding him were decomposing, the floor beneath him falling away in moldy patches. How much time had transpired since the spring lock tore through his body and fixed him within the costume? The urge to kill lingered within him still, the thirst long left unquenched. The sound filled his ears again, children's laughter. Were children playing in the kitchen? Springtrap rose to his feet, adjusting to his new body, and marched towards the sounds. He picked up speed as he moved, walking turned to running. He rushed into the kitchen and found nothing. No children, no games, no laughter, just a swirling mess of black fog enveloping the far wall. Springtrap examined the fog. Curiosity tightened its grip on him. As he stared into the darkness, his distended eyes could see shapes emerge within the fog. Who were they? It didn't matter. They were his victims now. Somehow he knew the hunt could go on forever. All he had to do was step into the fog. So this bio confirms that William was taken sometime after he got springlocked, and it also gives us some interesting insight into the game's version of William. Because, this is the first time we've ever really seen something from William's perspective. No, UCN doesn't count. And yeah, he's very similar to the version in the movies and books. He has an urge to kill and seems to particularly like the hunt, because, that's what he said. He knew the hunt could go on forever. I mean, the first thing he does when he gets up is try to kill some kids, And as we see in the actual game itself, he is definitely kind of a showman. His lines are also very corny, but that makes sense. The way I see it, Dead by Daylight, William is pretty much just let loose because there's no consequences to his actions. He doesn't have to compose himself. He can just kind of let loose, do whatever he wants. I do wish that the game maybe gave us a little bit of insight into the scientific side of William a little bit, the scientist side. I understand why that would have been hard for obvious reasons, but it still would have been cool. It's a very interesting part of his character. I guess maybe you could say there's a little bit of that where he was curious about the fog, but I feel like anybody would be, so yeah. But it definitely gives us some interesting insight. It does show that contrary to popular belief, he is just a serial serial killer at the end of the day, you know? Like, yes, he does have a deeper purpose with, like, his experiments and stuff, but at the end of the day, he just likes to kill people, dude. Anyway, let's talk about the actual lore implications of the bio. First off, it seems to say that William did actually die in the spring locking. For a while, me and others thought that William was still alive in the suit, surviving off his agony. But this seems to imply that he did actually die, but I guess he was kind of revived in a way. He doesn't possess the suit, though. In FNaF 6, we can hear his heart beating, so yeah, he didn't just possess the suit. I guess it's like Michael. They were both dead for a period of time, and were now revived, and are now basically zombies. The bio also seems to imply William was never sealed in the safe room, since he could just get up and leave. This is strange, though, since in FNaF 3, Phone Dude says the safe room was boarded up, so I'm not really sure what was going on here. But let's talk about what's really interesting about this bio. It seems to heavily imply that Follow Me is actually after FNaF 1. While a lot of people have come to this conclusion over the years, there has always been a debate about whether or not William was spring-locked before or after 1. But this seems to imply after, as it states Freddy's was abandoned. But if it was before FNaF 1, it wouldn't be abandoned at all, since the Fazbear crew would still be working on it, you know, getting the building ready and stuff. That does not exactly fit the definition of abandoned. This is pretty neat, and also implies sister location is after FNaF 1, since that's implied to be after Follow Me. And if you want to know why, make sure to check out my video all about sister location's timeline placement. But here's another thing, it seems to imply Follow Me wasn't that long after FNaF 1 either, because when William woke up again, they mentioned that the walls were decomposing and the floor beneath him was falling away in moldy patches, and that means that it wasn't beforehand, so he probably went back to Freddy's shortly after FNaF 1 then. So that means Follow Me probably is not in the 2010s like I previously thought. So that's very interesting. I want to get your guys' thoughts on that. Still think Vanessa is an Afton though. With the upcoming release of Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, I've been thinking about how far the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise has come, from a simple point-and-click horror game to a franchise with a complex overarching storyline. It's insane how far this series has come. I've also been thinking about how it wasn't always meant to be this way. This series was meant to come to an end multiple times. Hell, the original game was just supposed to be a standalone. Then FNaF 3 was supposed to bring the story of the missing children and their killer to a close. However, the game simply wasn't scary enough, so Scott made FNaF 4 to not only give fans a more terrifying experience, but to show the origins of Fredbear's family diner, shows that the purple guy has been here from the start, and flesh out the protagonist from the first game. But the story of FNaF 4 was told in such a way that a majority of the community thought the entire series was just a dream. So Scott had to make Sister Location to clear up FNaF 4's story, and made FNaF 6 to truly tie up loose ends. And then he made UCN and the books, and now the original storyline is more of a mess than it already was. So that's what? 4 times the series tried to end? Well, Help Wanted was already in development at the time of FNaF 6, meaning it was never meant to be the ending of the entire series, but ignore that. And everyone knows about FNaF's tendency to always come back. Hell, some people wish it ended at FNaF 3, 4, or 6. But what if I told you there's an ending I neglected to mention in the intro? An ending that most of the community doesn't even know was meant to be the end of the series at one point. And it's one of the most beloved FNaF games. Well, until recently. That game is Sister Location. That's right, Sister Location was almost the ending at one point, and it is almost never talked about. Now, I've talked about this in my past video ranking all of FNaF's endings, but I thought this deserved a video all on its own, because Sister Location originally being the ending is such an obscure fact that deserves to be talked about more, and it might just have some implications for the lore. So join me as we talk about why Sister Location was the original ending, why it failed, and if Sister Location's custom night was always planned or not. But before we get into all of that, I just want to ask you guys to subscribe. I'm trying to hit 3K before the end of the year, and subscribing would help me out a ton, but only if you enjoy the video. If you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can. Before we talk about why Sister Location was the original ending, or at least why I think it was, we should talk about how I even know it was meant to be. Because most of the community seemingly does not know about this fact, and I can't blame them. The only reason we know Sister Location was the ending is because of a Steam post back when UCN came out. In this post, Scott talks about the endings he had planned before being happy with UCN. I had originally wanted FNaF 4 to be the end, but wasn't satisfied with what people took away from it. Then I planned on Sister Location being the last game, but wasn't satisfied with where it left the lore. Then I made Pizzeria Simulator, and I was happy where it left the lore, but not completely satisfied with the experience overall. But after the really great reception of UCN, I think I'm finally happy, smiley face. So there it is, clear as day. Sister Location was originally the ending of the Click Team era. And yet, no one seems to know. Why? Well, it's pretty simple. For one, this post was deleted, and for some reason it's kinda hard to find. I had to find a video of someone reading it over to even confirm its existence. And both of Sister Location's endings, the scooped ending and the Fazbear Frights cutscene, feel more like cliffhangers than a natural ending to the series. Also, side tangent here, but Scott doesn't mention FNaF 3 in this post as one of the endings. And when he was asked if FNaF 3 was the original ending in the doco interview, he said that it was the ending to a trilogy, and he could see himself ending the series there, but Springtrap's jump scare was just not scary enough, and that's what pushed him to make another game.
Was this meant to be the final game?
I think when I was making that game, in my mind, that was the end of a trilogy.
Yeah.
You know, I think in my mind the story was going to be 3 games, and in all honesty, I think Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was where I kind of started letting myself be driven a little bit more by criticisms of the game than maybe I had before. Before, it was just really, really excited, you know, happy to have all this stuff. But whenever 3 came out, I really was starting to pay attention to criticism. You know, for instance, you know, even though I may have, you know, in some, you know, alternate life, may have left the series alone at 3, people were not happy with the jump scare, and it's kind of as simple as that. People weren't happy with the jump scare of Springtrap, and that really bothered me. And so then that kind of, in my mind, I wouldn't let the series rest in a way, because I wanted to make another entry that was really, really scary again.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I accomplished that with Five Nights at Freddy's 4. You know, really focusing on really cool, really quick, unexpected jump scares that would kind of make you jerk. So yeah, so honestly, the series kind of was nudged forward by me wanting to improve upon the last entry.
This makes me wonder if FNaF 3 was ever actually the ending of the series, or was FNaF 4's narrative always planned? I don't know. You guys can talk about it in the comments. I'll talk about Sister Location since that's more interesting. So, now that we know Sister Location was the original ending of the series, we have to ask the question, why? Because, let's be honest, Sister Location's ending definitely feels like it's setting up another game. So how could Scott possibly think this was an ending to the original series? Well, I think I know. As we know, thanks to some of Scott's previous statements, Sister Location was made to explain FNaF 4. There's literally this Steam post we just talked about where he said he wasn't satisfied with what people took away from the game, and then there's this clip from the docu interview where he said,
about this game, it created a bit of a divide between people, specifically the box at the end, and then the TV advertisement with 1983, and then the Bite of 87 debate. How did you feel about the reactions to that?
Kind of like with Five Nights at Freddy's 3, where there was something I was kind of left unsatisfied with. The reaction to Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and then the box is tied into this, you know, very, very closely. I don't think that people weren't really happy from a lore standpoint. You know, even though I got the jump scares kind of right.
Yeah.
And the box really fit into that lore aspect. I felt that it had all gone kind of it had strayed too far from an actual story in a way. Me just saying that, I'm gonna get torn apart for even saying that, because people are gonna look at what I've ended up with and they're like, you call this a story? But by Final Fantasy 4, it kind of went a little too broad. It cast this net too wide for interpretation. I guess that's the best way to say it. You know, it went too broad for interpretation, and that left people unsatisfied. You know, because whereas the other ones, yeah, there were mysteries. 4 ended up just too mysterious to the point where you really couldn't, you know, there was no real way to figure out what was going on. And left people unsatisfied. And like I said, with, you know, jumping from 3 to 4, I knew that I had to go in and straighten that out. Like, you know, people aren't really happy with this. You know, I need to make another game. I need to kind of ground this again, not necessarily in reality, but I need to ground it in kind of storytelling again. You know, and really lay this down with what's going on. You know, obviously I watch all the game theory videos. You know, and you know, me and Matt have sometimes had an antagonistic relationship back and forth. You know, I inconvenience him with my games, and sometimes he inconveniences me with his theories. You know, but it's all in good fun. You know, but I'll tell you, he did a video on that box, and he kind of said that he thinks the contents of the box changed over the years. You know, and I bet nobody gave that a whole lot of thought, but I saw that and I was like, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. The contents of that box have changed over the years because, you know, it's for that very reason. It's because, you know, of what I was intending the game to be when it happened, and then after the reaction of it, I was like, I need to craft this into something better for the people who see this as important. And that kind of indirectly does change the contents of the box, you know, because it changes the contents of everything that came before. So I thought that was an interesting observation on his part.
With this in mind, I can see why Scott would have been fine with ending the series here. It was clearing up the FNaF 4 story. It cleared up if the game was in 1983 or 1987 with the private room, while also hinting towards the final speaker's true identity with the Fazbear plush in William's office. There's also Michael saying William asked him to put Elizabeth back together, but that's in Custom Night, and as we'll talk about later, we don't know if that was always planned. Although on that note, Elizabeth says she's broken, which could tie back to I will put you back together, and right before that, the Fazbear plush says you're broken. The game shows us the older brother is named Mike, who is clearly Mike Schmidt from FNaF 1, which will allow players to look back at FNaF 4 and realize that the FNaF 1 phone call was included to hint towards us playing as Mike Schmidt in that game. And if you didn't know Mike was the FNaF 4 player, make sure to check out my video about why Michael is Mike Schmidt and the FNaF 4 player. Also, the game debunks dream theory by showing us a real version of FNaF 4's night gameplay. The final boss of the game is also referencing FNaF 1 and 4 with the addition of a middle vent. Like how in FNaF 4, there are 3 things you need to close, and we play as Mike in this boss fight, so that's another connection. I could definitely see why Scott would view this as an ending if his goal was just to clear up FNaF 4. However, as an actual ending, it definitely leaves more to be desired. What, with the game ending on a cliffhanger on what happened to Ennard after it leaves the facility? It just feels like it's asking for a continuation. The game also introduced concepts such as the FNaF 4 bedroom actually existing in universe, and seemingly there were experiments with it, and the original missing children from FNaF 1 possessing the Funtime animatronics, which I do think was canon back then, and I will talk about later. Both of these need elaboration. Also, I guess the gameplay definitely left more to be desired, but the custom night is pretty good, so whatever. So overall, it doesn't really function as an ending to the series very well, but I do think there is some good stuff here. For example, Mike's ending. In this game, we are told Mike is reflecting on his past mistakes.
Welcome back for another night of intellectual stimulation, pivotal career choices, and self-reflection on past mistakes.
Which is almost definitely a reference to the Bite of 83, and he's trying to help Elizabeth to probably make up for that in some way. And in the end, he gives up his body so that she can have a second chance at life within it. You know, notice how he didn't run away from the scooper when he could have just done that. You know, he definitely gave himself up willingly. I think it's actually pretty decent, but unfortunately outside of that, the game just doesn't really function as an ending very well, especially since it doesn't really tie itself to any of the other games except FNaF 4, which makes sense since it was just made to clear up the story from that game. Speaking of the story, let's talk about what sister location being the original ending may imply for the overarching story of Five Nights at Freddy's. And for this, I'm just going to be talking about the base ending from the game, because again, the custom night is a whole can of worms I'll talk about later. One of the things I feel like could possibly be implied is that sister location is after 1. I mean, think about it. What would Mike being controlled by Ennard add to FNaF 1? So it would basically go like this. Mike kills his brother, then works at babies to help his sister, gets killed, and is used as a skin suit by Ennard. Then for some reason Ennard works at Freddy's and gets fired. And then for some reason Mike has nightmares based off FNaF 1. And then that's it. His story is over. Unless Mike Ennard is the FNaF 3 guard. It just makes more logical sense for FNaF 1 to be Mike's return to Freddy's, and then he does Sister Location. And then FNaF 4 could happen before or after Sister Location. I'll talk about that later. The game may be after FNaF 1, but is it before or after FNaF 3? Well, I feel like if it was the ending, it must be before, because I think the original 5 children, the MCI victims, were in the Funtime animatronics even when the game originally came out. Now I'll admit, the evidence for this is pretty weak when just looking at sister location. It really just comes down to the Funtime's eye color. The eye color of Funtime Freddy, Foxy, Ballora, and the Bonnie puppet match up exactly with the eye color of the classics from FNaF 1, with Ballora taking Chica's eye color. There's also Yendo, who is clearly some sort of Golden Freddy variant. He just kind of shows up while you're crawling through Fox's area on night 3 with no explanation. Maybe his only purpose was to show us, hey, Golden Freddy is in this game, so the rest of the kids are probably here too. I'm Scott Cawthon, I'm a great writer. Or maybe it's just an Easter egg, I don't know. Like I said, the evidence is weak, but it's there, and let's be honest, it is most likely canon now, and I don't see why Scott would retcon it into being the case, so it probably was when the game came out. To elaborate a little bit more, FNaF 6 was meant to tie up loose ends, and he brought the MCI back into that game, which would be weird if they weren't already back, since that would just be making a loose end to tie up, so I think they probably were back before that game came out. I also think Ennard is supposed to be the representation of the crime child being put back together, and I believe the crime child was sort of split across the MCI victims, which I've explained before, so I'll just play a clip of me explaining it here. I believe the crime child's memories somehow influence the rest of the timeline. This is a theory called memory victim, and it's been around for a while. I don't know who made it, so if someone could tell me, that'd be greatly appreciated. The evidence is all the stuff I just said. FNaF 4 clearly ties itself to the rest of the games despite being in the past. Scott said he didn't fill the game with random Easter eggs. This concept also seems to be implied in Silver Eyes, which was being written during FNaF 4's development. What? She said defensively. I don't believe in ghosts. I do, Charlie said. I mean, not ghosts, but memories. I think they linger, whether there's someone there or not. And then later in the same scene, I don't know. Sometimes I have these little moments where it's like there's something I forgot, something I regret, or that I'm happy about, or something that makes me want to cry. But it's only there for a split second, then it's gone. Maybe we're all shedding our fear and regrets and hope everywhere we go, and we're catching traces of people we've never met. Maybe it's everywhere. How is that different from believing in ghosts? It's totally different. It's not supernatural. It's not like the souls of the dead people. It's just people leaving their mark on the world. So it's the ghosts of living people? No, you're talking about people having some kind of essence that can hang around a specific place after that person's gone. That's a ghost. I think the bite victim left his own mark on the world around him, his memories, and they went on to influence the timeline. Why was Toy Chica missing her beak in FNaF 2? Because when BV was alive, he saw a mini version of Toy Chica without speak. Furthermore, I'm pretty sure the bite victim's memories are what made up the Happiest Day minigames. There are multiple connections between what the crime child sees during FNaF 4 and the Happiest Day minigames. Just take a look at the graphic on screen. And obviously the most obvious one is the Happiest Day minigame is a reflection of the Bite of 83. It seems that FNaF 4 was explaining the weirdness behind the Happiest Day minigames, which I don't think anyone actually cared about, but it's cool, I guess. But not only that, I think we could say the crime child somehow possesses the 5 main animatronics and maybe the puppet, and the missing children are intertwined with his memories. This is a theory called Shatter Victim. Again, if someone can tell me who made this theory, please tell me so I can credit them. This theory poses that the crime child's soul somehow shatters across at least the 5 main animatronics and probably the puppet, because of how similar they look. This theory seems implied in FNaF 3, where we see that the 5 missing children are trapped in Cece's memories, and bringing the memories together frees them and him. Because of later entries in the series, we know the crime child is at least a Golden Freddy. Like Marla said, he was shedding his fear, probably into the Freddy characters, because he considers them his friends. When William killed the children, they possessed the animatronics and became attached to his memories within the characters. It also seems supported in the survival logbook, where Cassidy seems to have the bite victim's memories, as she asks, does he still talk to you on the Fredbear plush page, despite supposedly not being able to know who the Fredbear plush is. If you want further clarification, make sure to check out that video. And I don't know, I just can't see the story ending with the missing children just kind of hanging out in Mike's body forever. It just feels weird for Sister Location to be after 3 with the missing children still in the fun times, meaning they weren't free, obviously. Then again, it could be just soul splitting. I don't know. See, this is why Sister Location just doesn't work as an ending. It leaves way too many loose ends. Anyway, let's talk about what else it could mean for FNAF 3, in particular the guard in that game. Yep, I'm gonna talk about the FNAF 3 guard again, like I haven't done that enough. While writing this video, I came up with the idea that Mike Ennard went on to become the FNAF 3 guard, which I know sounds kind of weird, but hear me out. Like I talked about a couple minutes ago, the spirits of the missing children were most likely in the fun times since the release of Sister Location. And it would be odd for Sister Location to be after FNAF 3 because that means the missing children were just in the fun times even though they were supposed to have been set free in FNAF 3. And if Sister Location was the final game, that means that if the game was after FNAF 3, the kids just kind of live in Mike's body forever. But here's the thing, even if Sister Location is before 3, it's still weird because that means the missing children are in Mike's body, and then Happiest just kind of happens and they're free, I guess. Even though there should still be a part of them living in Mike. This is equally as weird as having them just living in Mike's body, in my opinion. And I'm sure this could just be sloppy writing, but I came up with an idea that makes it a little less sloppy. It is kind of weird though. Maybe Mike Ennard went on to become the FNAF 3 guard. And while there, he did all the Happiest Day shit, and they were set free. I think this is really the only logical way for Sister Location to really work as an ending, and it just makes sense with what FNAF World implies. In one of that game's endings, the Yellow Eyes tells the crying child that the pieces are in place for him, and all he has to do is find them. And these pieces are the Happiest Day minigames that we set up throughout FNAF World. So this implies that the crying child has to find the pieces, right? Maybe he did that in Mike's body with the Ennard and all that, you know? Because you gotta remember, the idea I'm working under is that the crying child is kind of split across all the MCI kids, right? So when they're all put together, he will be put back together as well. And this can explain how the guard sets up the minigames if he does. They can punch into walls and stuff because he's being piloted by ghosts. It also means FNAF 3 is literally the killer versus his victims, which is actually kind of cool. This idea is interesting, I think, although as I'm actually talking about it and like thinking it through, it's definitely not as strong as I thought when I made that community post out of excitement. Like, guys, you don't understand, when I made that community post, I thought I found like the fucking answer to like everything, dude. I don't know what I was thinking. Is it still possible Scott had this in mind when Sister Location released? Yeah, but as of now, it probably isn't canon if it ever was for a lot of reasons. Like how in Mike's speech, he says he has been living in shadows, implying there has been some time between Ennard leaving his body and Mike's speech. But if Mike Ennard was the guard, the speech would only be like a day after Fazbear's Fright burned down. Like, what do you mean you've been living in shadows, dude? It's been like a fucking few hours, dude. What are you talking about? But then again, there is some stuff that could point towards it. I'll probably make an entire video about this idea someday, so just be on the lookout for that. The final thing I want to talk about is what Sister Location being the original ending may imply for the placement of FNAF 4's gameplay on the timeline. I've always believed that Sister Location happened before FNAF 4's gameplay, but after thinking about it in the context of Sister Location originally being the final game, I'm not so sure anymore. Think about it. FNAF 4's gameplay happening after Sister Location, with it originally being the ending, doesn't really make sense. Unless the whole Mike Ennard being the FNAF 3 guard idea is true, and Mike has the FNAF 4 dreams during FNAF 3's gameplay, kind of making those games a dual narrative, but I doubt that. I just feel like the more natural progression of the narrative would be FNAF 1, then 4, then Sister Location. Like, let's really think about the FNAF 4 gameplay happening after Sister Location, with it originally being the ending. There's no continuation, okay? So Mike would work at FNAF 1, then work at Sister Location. That's fine. That's a fine narrative. But then for some reason he has nightmares based on FNAF 1 after Sister Location, and then there's a little bit of Sister Location stuff there with the Nightmare Fredbear mouth, right? Okay, sure. But then that's just kind of like the ending to his story. That's just really, really weird. But a more natural story would be FNAF 1, right? Then the FNAF 4 nightmares where he's, you know, all this guilt-ridden stuff, and then he does Sister Location, kind of like confronting his guilt, and then, you know, the ending with him getting scooped. I feel like that's a more natural type of story. But then again, I'm not Scott, so I don't really know what he was intending with the story. This is just like speculation, right? However, I feel like this could have changed. In the survival logbook, Mike draws Nightmare Fredbear under recent dreams, but he has already gone through Sister Location by the time of that book. So maybe it was retconned. Now, that's all the lore stuff I could think about with Sister Location being the original ending. But I'm really interested to hear you guys' opinions in the comments. I feel like there's definitely more that I'm missing. Like, there's probably stuff with like Happiest Day you could talk about that I don't know, I just can't think of right now. So I'm really interested to hear your guys' perspectives on this game being the original ending and what it could imply, since no one ever really talks about it. However, I think there's something that's even more interesting to talk about, that being Sister Location's custom night update. As I'm sure you guys have noticed before, because I've said it a lot, I've only been talking about Sister Location Location being the original ending under the assumption the base ending is what Scott was talking about in the UCN Steam post. And I've been doing this because we don't know if the custom night update was the ending at some point or not. And this is something I find to be really interesting, since you can make an argument for and against it being the ending to the series. For the custom night being the ending, we have this Steam post where Scott is talking about the Fazbear Frights cutscene. In this post, he's talking about how he'll release the cutscene when the game is updated. Cause yeah, for some reason the cutscene wasn't out when the game came out, I don't know. What's important here is the end of the post. When the final cutscene is ready, I will give very hard mode a little more juice to help dedicated players make it to 6 AM. Then we can finally see what becomes of Eggs Benedict. Then our story can be complete. Why the fuck did I do that voice? Oh, by the way, this post was deleted, so you can't find it now. Sorry. What's really interesting about this post, besides it really pointing towards Mike Trap, like, seriously, Scott, why did you say we would see what becomes of Eggs Benedict? Come on, Scott, why did you say that? Is the last sentence. Then our story can be complete. This can be interpreted as saying the whole story will be complete with the new cutscene. Now, you could say this is only saying the story of Sister Location will be complete. But then again, you could argue that Sister Location's story was kind of already wrapped up with the minigames, and now this cutscene ties the game's events to the larger story. So this is referring to the story as a whole. Especially since I feel like the final cutscene doesn't really complete the story of Sister Location, like, at all. Like, that was already kind of complete. All it tells us is that Mike has been living in shadows, and I guess that's the completed story. I guess it gives a little more exposition to what was happening, like with him putting Elizabeth back together, but again, that's not really completing the story, that's just explaining what was happening. It's definitely left open to interpretation. Another thing you might be able to use to argue this is the ending of Sister Location itself. Like I've said before, it definitely feels like a cliffhanger. Maybe it was, and Scott had already planned the custom night to kind of wrap things up. For the custom night not being the ending, we have the ending of custom night itself. If you think that the base ending feels like a cliffhanger, then the custom night ending is like if you were hanging off the cliff with one finger. The ending of Custom Night is Michael having a monologue about how he wants to find William, and then he says we're gonna come find you, and then Springtrap is revealed to have survived the FNaF 3 fire. And while yes, Springtrap was seen in the final newspaper of FNaF 3, that was definitely left more open to interpretation on whether or not he survived. The end of Custom Night shows for a hard fact that he did. That definitely feels like it's setting up another game, even if you agree with the interpretation that this cutscene is showing the outcome of William and Mike's meeting in FNaF 3. Like, there's a reason people were like, holy shit, there's gonna be FNaF 6 after this cutscene, dude. Not to mention that in the other cutscenes, Ennard leaves Mike's body. That is something that could have been explored in another game. Also, how Mike was even able to be alive could have been explored. And what do you know it? All of that was picked up on in FNaF 6. It's almost like the custom night was setting up FNaF 6. And this especially makes sense when you consider the custom night was announced 10 days after Sister Location's release. It's totally possible that in those 10 days, Scott realized he was unsatisfied with the ending of Sister Location and wanted to make another game. And then he made the custom night to get the characters on the right place for the next game. But then again, Sister Location's ending already feels like a cliffhanger, and we know that one of Sister Location's endings was supposed to be the end at some point, so it's possible Scott just made the same mistake twice with both endings. Like, the custom night was supposed to tie everything together, but it just felt like another cliffhanger. It didn't feel like a proper conclusion, and overall another game was necessary. So as you guys can probably see, it's definitely a complicated subject, and both sides have valid arguments. What do I think? Well, I go back and forth. I can see both sides and understand Scott's potential thought process with both. I usually lean towards the custom night never being the ending, since I have a very hard time seeing Scott show Springtrap surviving the fire, and then that's it. He was never going to show what happens to him after. There's also Ennard just living in the sewers forever, which would be really strange, and overall definitely feels like it was setting up another game to me. But I have also thought it was the ending in the past, so I don't know. I would love for Scott to clarify this. I feel like it's something he would confirm, but he probably won't, unless someone emails him or something, and that's probably not going to work out, so yeah, probably don't email Scott. He probably just won't respond, so don't do it. Anyways, with the custom night being the ending, there are some potential lore reveals. There's all the stuff I talked about earlier, but if the custom night was ever originally the ending, then that would basically confirm Mike was the FNaF 3 guard at some point. I mean, the final cutscene of the series would literally be Scott saying he's going to come find William, and the visual is Fazbear's Fright. If the custom night was the ending, then this obviously means he finds William at Fazbear's Fright. And yeah, it would basically confirm Mike is the FNaF 3 guard. But like I said, we simply don't know if the custom night was the ending or not. So unfortunately, we can't really use this as confirmation. Warning, spoilers for Secret of the Mimic. Five Nights at Freddy's is no stranger to debates. When the FNaF 4 minigames took place, 1983 or 1987, or if William or Mike was Springtrap, and more that I don't care to mention. However, there is one debate that has grown larger than any of these. That debate is, of course, whether or not the Fazbear Frights and Tales from the Pizzaplex books are canon or not. For years, the community has begged Scott Cawthon to answer this debate because, straight up, it was not fun, and it seemed like the answer would never come. But somehow it did. Just yesterday, FNaF's Secret of the Mimic released, and it finally ended the book debate, and somehow everyone lost. Let me explain. First off, let's talk about what Secret of the Mimic has to say about the book debate. Of course, this is about the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, since that's where the Mimic first appeared. Secret of the Mimic confirms without a shadow of a doubt that Tales from the Pizzaplex is not canon to the games. How, you might be asking? Well, I'm so glad you asked. It all comes down to the character of Fiona, the wife of Edwin and the mother of David. Fiona gets quite a bit of screen time in this game. I have a feeling after this game she will become a fan favorite, but that's not important. What is important is the fact that Fiona was alive at the same time as David. This is confirmed multiple times in the game. There's an audio log you can find where Fiona says she's going to meet up with the Fall Fest crew and that she'll get a babysitter for David.
I hope this message reaches you as soon as you get a break. I have to go help the Fall Fest crew. Just for a few days until the installation is finished.
Fall Fest?
It's hard to explain. I just have this terrible feeling like I need to be there so nothing goes wrong.
That's the 0-point field, of course.
Just in case. Trisha will babysit David while I'm gone. I love you.
David! Okay, but this could just be the Mimic mimicking her. Okay, sure, we'll go with that. That doesn't explain the family videos Arnold can find when he enters Edwin's house. These tapes are clearly in a chronological order of David's birthdays. And for the first 2 tapes, Fiona is alive. And in the 3rd tape, Edwin says she is gone, which implies that she has died.
Happy birthday, buddy.
Oh, this is like the progression of the narrative.
David, Mommy's gone. Not all gone, buddy. In a way, she's here. She's with us. Mommy will always be here, watching over us. You better start opening. There's a lot to open. I gotta get back to work. I miss you.
It's only after this Mimic Fiona shows up. This means for the first 2 years of David's life, Fiona was alive. There's also an audio log that can be found in game of Edwin talking about how he'll have to tell David Fiona is gone.
Why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there. You were supposed to be here, me and David. Oh, how am I supposed to tell David that his mother is gone? How am I supposed to raise a kid on my own?
Oh, so she's dead.
His life is ruined.
He doesn't even sound that messed up about
My
it.
life is ruined.
But if David was just a baby or had just been born, he wouldn't have to tell him this since, he's a baby. There's also a family photo of Edwin, Fiona, and David. It's also implied that Fiona died at Fall Fest. There's that audio log I talked about earlier, but also in the Moon.exe game, there's a statue of 2 people getting married, and the wife is burnt. This game is obviously symbolizing something to do with the Murrays, so it's likely this couple's Edwin and Fiona. And as we know, Fall Fest has had multiple fires, or at least just one big one, so it's possible Fiona died there in the fire. And why does that matter? Well, because a huge plotline in the Mimic story from Tales from the Pizzaplex is that Fiona dies during childbirth. Like literally, while David was being born, she bled to death. This is a major contradiction. And you can't just argue it's a little mistake because it's not. Because it's not just like a little thing, right? That's like a pretty big contradiction between the stories. It's not just something that you just easily mess up. But it's not just Fiona. How about the fact Edwin is heavily implied to have died in the 70s, being killed by M2?
Test. Journal entry.
M2?
Too bad the new power test was a failure. Due to a minor detonation, there is damage to my office interior, as well as a small fire. Note to self, portable cleaner that gets rid of smoke damage. Better yet, a Cleanovac attachment.
So this is not Edwin, guys. This is the Mimic.
Help! M2! Respond! Emergency! Call for help!
Oh shit.
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play? Please!
Oh, is Edwin...
I can't move. I can't feel my legs.
Is Edwin dead?
Speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out. I'm sorry, M2.
No, so he did break it.
I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond. Oh, I can't right now, buddy. We can do something fun tomorrow. I promise.
Dude, why is he doing this?
She's not busy. M2,
Is he looking for another David? The framing of this scene definitely feels like it's showing us that Edwin has died. I mean, it's asking M2 for help, M2 isn't giving it, you know, classic evil robot stuff, really. There's also the fact that this whole game started with, oh, Edwin is missing, and then at the end of the game, you would realize, oh, this is what happened to Edwin. This is why he's missing. He died. This is, of course, a huge contradiction to the books because Edwin doesn't die in those until the Pizzaplex era. Oh, and if you want to see more of my reaction to this game, make sure to subscribe to my gaming channel, Zetto the Gamer, for when I upload that episode of my Secret of the Mimic playthrough. And while you're at it, why don't you subscribe to this channel as well? I'm trying to hit 3.5k before the end of the year, and subscribing would be a massive help. But only if you enjoy the video, and if you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can. Finally, Edwin's father is the one who found the company in Secret of the Mimic. But in Tales, Edwin started it after college. All of this, as well as just like everything with MCM, shows us that Tales is definitely not canon. Especially since Seawolf said they were making Secret of the Mimic at the same time the books were coming out, and they were doing a dual medium with the games and books.
How carefully are you putting the books in consideration of Secret of the Mimic? So, you know, Tales of the Pizzaplex had a lot of lore about the Mimic and Edwin. Did you take that for this game?
Yeah, you know, we've actually been talking about making this game for a long time, and we were developing the game kind of while these books are coming out. So yeah, I will say it's interesting. Again, I won't go into like the books and all of that, but it's interesting to work kind of in dual mediums.
I don't think they were lying. I think Steelwool and Scott made a conscious effort to make the game's story as different from the books to show they aren't canon. Or well, vice versa, I think the book's story was made differently from the games. Like seriously, if they're working so closely with the books, and there's this many contradictions, I think that kind of says something. This, of course, poses the question of why Tales was even written, especially since it seems to fit in the games pretty well, but I'll talk about that later. But something else I want to talk about is an idea going around that actually, Tales is still canon, just the Mimic and Storyteller and Tiger Rock by extension aren't, because Secret of the Mimic retconned them. I doubt this. First of all, from what I can tell, people get this idea from the Star Wars universe. In that franchise, after the Disney buyout, almost every book was considered canon, but if the TV shows or movies changed something, or retell events from those books, then that's what really happened. Basically, they're a secondary tier of canon. There's this great video from the channel Sheaves Talks that goes over this in more detail. And this would be fair to consider if it wasn't for the fact that Star Wars is not Five Nights at Freddy's. We really have no reason to think this is how it works in the FNaF franchise, not to mention every Tales story was canon to each other. So if 3 of them aren't canon, there's really no reason to think the rest are, outside of trying to hold on to a now debunked theory. Now personally, I actually did believe the whole secondary tier of canon idea for a while, but only because I didn't think the games would change things so drastically. I thought it just changed like little details like designs, you know, that's what I was talking about, not like Fiona's entire story. Not like the origins of Edwin's company, and not like Edwin's fates, you know? So yeah, Tales isn't canon, by extension neither is Fazbear Frights, since they are both connected via the story Frailty, which seems to tie Fazbear's Frights and Tales together, with the main protagonist seemingly being a victim of Eleanor's. Also, if Tales isn't canon, why would Frights be, like, logically? This makes sense when we consider the story Prankster. In this story, the phrases stingers moot and even more frights are said, and the Ultimate Guide calls these out as meta clues. And it seems to be saying that the stingers, most likely the Stitch Race stingers, are moot or unimportant, and then even more frights is most likely referring to Tales, since that's just basically Fazbear's Frights, but at the Pizzaplex. Could these clues basically mean the stingers are moot, and there's even more frights coming, and those are moot too? I don't know, it's 5 AM, I haven't slept in 24 hours, I'm just throwing the idea out there. And also, after thinking about it more, the idea of the Stitch line, the theory that only the stories mentioned to and connected to the epilogues of Fazbear Frights are canon, was kinda unfounded. Sure, Scott said that some stories are connected to the games, but this could just mean that they are connected in that they explore concepts from the games. Like Coming Home is connected to the games because it focuses on Susie, a character from the games. So there's really no reason to think that the Fazbear Frights stories aren't canon to each other. And if that's the case, then Frights can't be canon because what we found literally exists. This story is a retelling or adaptation of FNaF 3, but it's so different that there's just no way it can be canon. It's 2 nights, the layout of Fazbear's Fright is different, hell, the name is different, in the story it's called Fazbear Frights with an S, and the building doesn't burn down in the end. Anyways, it seems like Fazbear's Frights and Tales from the Pizzaplex aren't canon. You might be wondering why Scott wrote Tales then if they aren't canon. Well, I don't know. My main guess is the obvious, money, keeping the franchise relevant, or fun, and Tales still helps us solve things from the games, but I'll talk about that later. I'm guessing Scott wrote Tales mainly because he just enjoys writing these stories, or well, making outlines and then making someone else write them, so he kept doing it. He probably thought the community would assume they aren't canon, since at the time the majority of the community thought Frights wasn't canon. I can't say for sure, of course, this is just speculation. So then we won, right? We finally got an answer to the book debate, a debate that has been going on for longer than half of the franchise's lifespan. Well, yes and no, because here's the thing. Tales and Frights not being canon opens up a lot of questions that I will try to answer today. Let's start with a pretty major one. What about the Into the Pit game? Is it canon? Is it not? Well, I'm not really sure. I'm guessing it isn't canon though, since it was originally just supposed to be a novelty game on like the NES or something, and just became bigger over time. And this game's lore is a mess. It's filled with random Easter eggs, and also not random Easter eggs, and Scott was seemingly kind of uninvolved in the development, since he said Megacat kind of went into the hole for a while before updating him. Seems like it wasn't really a focus for him.
And how has it been working on the game based on a Fazbear Frights story?
It's definitely been a unique experience. You know, I first started talking to Meg, I mean, it's been years and years since that game has been in development, and originally it was just supposed to be a little novelty one-off, like, oh yeah, here's this little company that makes 16-bit cartridges, and that was immediately appealing to me because I'm all about the Super Nintendo, and so if I could make something that would come on the Super Nintendo cartridge, you know, sign me up. That was the most exciting thing, the most exciting product I'd ever worked on. It was still just supposed to be a novelty, but as the development went on, everybody was looking at it thinking, this looks pretty good. This actually looks really good, and so they just kept on going with it. They could have stopped a lot sooner, and they could have stopped with just a little simple novelty game, but they just kept going, and I kept looking at thinking, yeah, keep going, and they kept going, and I would keep looking at it, and it just turned into this big, full-fledged, full-sized game. So we obviously decided to venture away from strictly the cartridges, so that everybody can be able to play it on Steam and everything.
How has it been working with Megacat Studios then?
Oh, it's been great. It's been really great. I really haven't had to give them. I mean, I have had to give them direction, but for the most part, it's been weird. They would go into the hole for 6, 7, 8 months at a time, and I wouldn't hear anything from them, to the point where I thought, is this okay? And I would even, you know, I talk to the other people that I work with, like, is this game okay? Is this going to be okay? Are they okay? Do I need to check on this? Do we need to check on them over there? But then I would get an update, and it would just be all this crazy new stuff and all this crazy detail, this fluid animation. It's just crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. And then they'd go back into the hole again for 5, 6, 7 months. And then we just repeat that cycle. But now here we are finally at the end of that road, and I think it's just turned out really great. Like I said, really unique, and I think everybody's going to really like it.
This should be obvious when we consider that Vanny was almost in the game, which doesn't make sense for obvious reasons. Some might say that it's been said the Into the Pit game's Easter eggs had to be approved by old Scott to make sure they didn't go against the lore, so it must be canon.
Make it hours and hours of interactable stuff where you can read and all that, and the problem was, as well, you didn't want to put in enough that it either spoiled too much or like it became contrary to the actual lore and all that. But yeah.
And that is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean the lore of the FNaF franchise, just the lore of the Into the Pit game. Everything has to make sense in the context of that story. Like, let's talk about the Vanny stuff again. That has to have been removed because not only does Vanessa being alive at the time of the MCI not make sense for the overall FNaF lore, it doesn't make sense for the lore of the Into the Pit game itself. Okay, so the Into the Pit game may not be canon, but what about Return to the Pit? Actually, what about the interactive novels in general? Well, I think The Week Before is definitely canon. It says it's a prequel right on the back, and if one book is canon, by that logic, all of them should be, right? Especially since Return to the Pit seems to try to be more accurate to the games with 5 MCI hits instead of 6. So yes, I am arguing that Return to the Pit is more canon than the actual game. Alright, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. What do we use Frights and Tales for now? Because here's the thing, yes, they aren't canon, that seems undeniable, but what is also undeniable is that they are still important to solving the lore. Scott said this about Frights, saying that they fill in gaps from the past, and Tales was most likely written to clear up the story after Security Breach. Even though they aren't canon, that is still clearly the intent. I mean, there's literally a story that basically says, hey, here's what was going on in those experiments in Sister Location, and here's who Patient 46 is. I also think Scott used Tales to introduce the Murrays, since they would be relevant in the next mainline game, and Security Breach didn't set them up, like, at all. This is most likely why Tales still has story beats from Secret of the Mimic, but they're changed. For example, like Fiona's death, the storyteller is kind of in Secret of the Mimic, although it's not called the storyteller.
If writers have you blocked, use an MCM story template. Simply supply the stage manager with the desired character names, location, and genre. It writes itself. Additional
That's like the storyteller.
Available for purchase. What about the talent? Well, we removed the talent. No difficult puppeteers, demanding actors, or moody directors needed. Our system is drama-free.
And more. So at the end of the day, the books are still important, but how? Well, I think I know, and this is where we get into why I said everybody loses at the start. One of the most infamous characters in Fazbear Frights is that of Andrew. He takes up the role of the Vengeful Spirit from UCN in the Fazbear Frights books. In UCN, the Vengeful Spirit is often assumed to be Cassidy, Golden Freddy. I'm sure with the Fazbear Frights books being confirmed not canon, most people will assume that Cassidy being the Vengeful Spirit is also confirmed, which is fair, but I disagree. Even though Fazbear Frights isn't canon, I still think Andrew is the one. Wait, please don't click off, hear me out first. My logic is pretty simple, really. It all comes down to Edwin, David, and Fiona, and I guess the Mimic too. Their stories and tales are completely different from how they are in the games, and yet they are the same characters. I think this carries over with Andrew as well. You could argue that it's different, that there's no proof Andrew exists in the games, but I have to disagree. In Toy Chica The High School Years, Toy Chica, who represents William Afton, kills 6 people in the show, which is likely the 5 MCI kids and Charlie. But there's a secret 7th victim, but it's always been 6. This implies the existence of a secret victim. And no, it's not Elizabeth or the Crying Child, since the victims are people Toy Chica actively stalks and kills. William did not stalk Crying Child or Elizabeth. Hell, he didn't even kill the Crying Child. So that implies the existence of a secret victim. There's also the fact that the one you should not have killed has male pronouns, while Cassidy is a girl in the novels. And a character's gender has never changed between continuities, so she is likely still a girl in the games. The main thing to me is all the stuff I talked about earlier with Edwin, though. Him still existing in the games despite having a totally different story leads me to believe that Andrew is probably still canon as the Vengeful Spirit, and I believe Hudson Foster, from what we found, is probably the FNaF 3 guard for similar reasons. Sure, the story of what we found is very different from FNaF 4, but Hudson still has the role of the FNaF 3 guard, like how Edwin still has the role of being the creator of the Mimic. Now, I don't really like the Andrew thing, since that means UCN doesn't really have an ending and goes on forever. Say what you will about Frights, but at least UCN ends there. Maybe not very well, but it does. But notice how I said that Andrew and Hudson are probably canon. That's because I can't say for sure, because, well, we have no way of knowing. It's totally possible that Edwin and his family are a unique case, and they're canon while Andrew isn't. Especially since, let's be honest, so much in UCN seems to be pointing towards Golden Freddy as the one. And this is why I said, ultimately, everyone lost when Secret of the Mimic confirmed the book debate. Sure, the debate is over, but now we don't know what to do with the books. We don't know how to use them, what level of importance they hold. And that's kind of ironic in a way, that everyone lost in this huge debate. So please, let me know in the comments what you think. I'm genuinely curious, since I feel like now one debate has ended, another will soon begin. And also, I want to talk about the idea of Frights reboot and Tales reboot real quick. From what I can tell, it's the idea that the Mega Cat games and Steel Wool games are rebooting Frights and Tales to make them work in the game timeline. And I disagree. First of all, I don't even think the Into the Pit game is canon, and Secret of the Mimic is so different from Tales, I don't think it was ever intended to be a reboot of the story, in my opinion. I think what happened is that Tales was maybe Scott setting up the Mimic's origin, or just a fun AU, or like they're just taking elements from the books, I don't know. But I'm just gonna have to say I don't think the reboot theories are correct. I just think Tales and Frights just aren't canon, and were never canon. The final thing I want to talk about is this note that has been found in Secret of the Mimic. It's written by Fiona, and here's what it says. Memory, error, detail, report. We were expecting. There were complications. Consciousness was lost for an undetermined time. Once I woke, we were all together and happy, a family, but something was wrong. I felt wrong somehow. Was I me? I would never sleep again. Corrupted file suspected. Please advise. So this note was most likely written by Fiona, or like F10, whatever the fuck. And it says that they were expecting and there were complications. This sounds like a pregnancy gone wrong. And since she says consciousness was lost for an amount of time, and she's writing this as M1. Or well, technically we don't know if Fiona's possessing M1. It could just be the Mimic mimicking her, but it doesn't matter either way, since it would still think it is Fiona. Since she is the robot, and she says she felt like something was wrong, it seems like she's implying she died at childbirth, right? But this game straight up debunks that. So what's going on here? Well, the idea going around is something called Tales Dreams. Basically, the Mimic story was a dream Fiona had when she died, or that the Mimic had sometime. She dreamed that she died at childbirth, but woke up and everyone was together again, but now she's a robot. Oh no, she'll never sleep again. Do I think this is canon? No, probably not. I think it might just be a reference to Tales, but I doubt she dreamed the story or anything. It's possible though, I guess. So to basically summarize, Tales and Frights are not canon, but they fill in blanks from the games and are important for understanding the story. They show us who Patient 46 is, they explain the FNaF 4 experiments, they tell us the FNaF 3 guard is a random person, and they show us that Andrew is the vengeful spirit. This is maybe the worst possible outcome, since the concepts are canon, but the books aren't, so you have to read these non-canon books just to pick up on the few concepts they explain. Let me know what you guys think now that this horrible debate is over. I'm disappointed I was wrong, since I did think they were canon, and honestly, I feel like I'm so surprised Tales isn't in particular, because like, Fazbear Frights, I get that if you think like they're not canon, before all this, right? But Tales, I just felt like it was so obviously like, intended to be canon, but obviously I was wrong, and people have been calling out inconsistencies for years. You know, I just thought they were mistakes, but I guess they weren't, so yeah. I think I'm mostly disappointed Scott kept this debate going on so long though, since he does know about it. He's even joked about it before. Like, he made people, not me, get attached to these versions of the characters for years, only to basically say, hey, that's not true. Like, Edwin in Secret of the Mimic is basically a completely different guy. FNaF Secret of the Mimic has recently been released and it has quickly become a fan favorite game. One of the things I've seen get a huge positive reaction from the fans is the protagonist of this game, Arnold. Arnold is an overworked Fazbear technician who was tasked with going to Murray's costume manor to get technology left behind from Edwin Murray. The game really manages to get you attached to Arnold even if he doesn't say much or his appearance is never shown. Well, he says a lot for a FNaF protagonist, but whatever. However, we don't actually know much about Arnold. We only see less than 10 hours of his life. We don't know much about his personal life, probably because he doesn't really seem to have one because of how much work he does for Fazbear Entertainment. Due to this, fans have started to speculate about who Arnold actually is, and that's what I plan to do today. So join me as we talk about Arnold, I guess. I have two theories I want to go over, and I'll go over them in order of how likely I think they are. But before we can talk about who Arnold truly is, we have to first understand his story. So yeah, I'm basically going to recap Secret of the Mimic, but it's going to have a bit of character analysis thrown in, so you know, it's important, just watch it. We are first introduced to Arnold driving after completing a 36-hour shift for Fazbear Entertainment. On the drive, he gets a call from Dispatch, who acts as the phone guy for this game. He tells Arnold that Fazbear Entertainment has a new job for him, because he is the closest technician in the area. Arnold seems to be in disbelief by this, since just a few seconds ago, he told Dispatch he just worked a 36-hour shift, and he says the only reason he keeps doing so much work for Fazbear Entertainment is because...
No, I'm doing it because you guys keep threatening to dock my pay and repo my truck.
Keep this in mind since it is going to be important later. Nevertheless, Arnold accepts the job, not like he has much of a choice. The job is relatively simple. A contractor for Fazbear Entertainment named Edwin Murray has gone missing. Due to this, everything he was working on is now property of Fazbear Entertainment, so Arnold has to go in and get the property. Arnold arrives at Murray's costume manor and acquires a data diver, which was snuck in his van in the last job. He enters the building and goes to the security office. Dispatch tells him that he has to turn on the power and upgrade his data diver. Why Fazbear Entertainment couldn't just like hack the data diver or whatever, I don't know. He upgrades the data diver and turns on the power, where he may or may not have noticed the corpse of another Fazbear technician stuffed in a suit. He's told by Dispatch upon arriving back at the security office what his real job is. Edwin Murray had actually been working on an endoskeleton that can mimic the actions of characters. It can go into any mascot costume and adapt to the character, playing the role of it perfectly. It was built for Edwin's son, David. But Fazbear Entertainment sees massive potential in this endoskeleton and wants Arnold to get the schematics for it. The only problem is that the endoskeleton has been introduced to some kind of violence, making it murderous, meaning that if it gets its hands on Arnold, it will kill him. However, it would be very difficult for Arnold to actually leave the facility, so his best bet is to get the schematics stored in Edwin's office, and then Fazbear Entertainment could
maybe find a way to probably save your life from it.
Do what? Now, they've already tried to send other technicians in to get the Mimic, but things didn't go very well for them. The way to get to Edwin's office is to upgrade Arnold's data diver to executive permissions. He can do this by finding upgrade stations throughout the location. And this is basically the game, getting the upgrades for the data diver. Arnold first goes to the manager's office where he meets Jackie, an animatronic that tries to kill him. He barely escapes with his life, falling right into the security office. Dispatch talks to him, but right before he does, there's a lot of static, indicating that the Mimic, or a Mimic, is speaking to him, mimicking Dispatch. Arnold then goes to fix an elevator, which may or may not be something he usually does as a technician, to get to the Big Top showroom, to get an upgrade, and he has to face off against Big Top, who would have guessed. After this, Arnold is tasked with building a Springlock suit to access the horrible Foxy puppet show in the theater. Springlock suits are something that Arnold is most likely familiar with as a Fazbear technician. After constructing the suit, he must get inside it. The suit even helps him hide against the Mimic, since it will not recognize him in the suit. So wait, Arnold must get into his suit and play the role of a character, which he does in the puppet show playing the role of the captain. And the main antagonist of this game is a character whose whole shtick is getting into suits and playing the role of the character. It doesn't even recognize Arnold in his suit. I wonder if this is an intentional parallel between these characters and if there are any more parallels between the characters we can notice in the game. Maybe we should be on the lookout for that. When he enters the theater, Arnold will encounter the White Tiger for the first time. I hate that name, but I can't call him Tiger Rock since technically he isn't called that. Actually, I'm gonna do it anyway. Tiger Rock is not the Mimic, he is something supernatural, most likely possessed by David or his agony, but it doesn't really matter as of now. After beating the puppet show, the show area kind of falls apart and Arnold falls into the doll hospital. Here he meets Dolly, and we learn that in the FNaF universe, Edwin invented recycling.
So I'm
very excited about our next showroom.
Oh shit.
Welcome to the world's first recycling center.
What?
Arnold has to go through the hospital and put trash into the trash chutes. He finds another upgrade station here. Arnold gets stuck in the elevator and has to fix it. And then Dolly jumps in the elevator, so he has to fix it up again. It's here where we learn that the Mimic is actually in Dolly, if that wasn't obvious enough. Once he returns to the office, he is told that he can now access the admin wing. That's where Edwin's office is located. The way to the admin wing is through the warehouse. Upon entering the warehouse, the Mimic will be seen hunting Arnold in a Chica suit, which is a character Arnold may or may not be familiar with. Sneaking through the warehouse, Arnold will enter the horribly designed admin wing level. Getting through that leads to Edwin's office, where the Mimic schematics can be found. Escaping Edwin's office, Arnold must travel through the tunnels. However, he isn't alone. Tiger Rock, who Arnold has been hallucinating for over an hour at this point, is down here as well. Interestingly, he can actually kill Arnold this time, while also seemingly giving him hallucinations of himself, which is kind of weird. Unlike the previous sections of the game, where Arnold must hide in the shadows, he must stay in the light, as Tiger Rock cannot attack him when he's in the light. After getting through the tunnels, Arnold finds himself in the main office for the final time. This is where he has a choice of giving up the data diver or instead executing the parachute.exe. The canon route is most likely executing parachute, but if he gives up the data diver, he will actually be able to leave the factory. Upon leaving, he'll get a call from the real dispatch, revealing that he has been trying to reach Arnold all night, meaning that dispatch has mainly been the Mimic throughout the game. Due to Arnold's confusion, we know that he did not recognize this. After he is fired by dispatch, he is then killed by the Mimic and possesses the prototype Freddy hidden under MCM. If Arnold executes parachute.exe, he will be able to go to a prototype version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Here, the Mimic will wear an amalgamation of prototype parts that I like to call Prototrap, because it's funny. He plays FNaF 1 in reverse, and it's revealed that the Mimic that has been communicating with him all night is actually F10N4, the first version of the Mimic nicknamed M1. It is either possessed by Fiona, Edwin's wife, or M1 thinks she is Fiona. It doesn't really matter to Arnold's story. She tells him to go to Edwin's house to find Edwin to repair M2, who's the Mimic that's been chasing him all night. Arnold goes to Edwin's house and has to find tapes that he must watch to enter Edwin's home office. Upon going there, he will find no Edwin, a tape on the wall implying he died. After this, Arnold activates something known as Cradle, and then M2 shows up without a suit for the first time. Arnold must escape Murray's Custom Manor now burning around him. He escapes to his van. Unfortunately, the Mimic catches up with him and crashes the van, taking the data diver, leaving Arnold alive, but in a burning car. The Mimic leaves and Arnold passes out. Whether or not he lived is up for interpretation. Arnold can also get the secret storytime ending. However, this ending doesn't really add anything to Arnold's story outside of him helping to save the Mimic and him liking to find things, I guess, since he has to find all the collectibles. Now that we have recapped Arnold's story, let's do a bit of character analysis. As you may remember, I called out that Arnie parallels the Mimic with how he wears a spring-lock suit and takes up the role of that character, much like how the Mimic takes up the roles of the characters it wears. I also asked if Arnold may parallel the Mimic in more ways, and obviously I think he does. First of all, the spring-lock suit is not the only role Arnold plays in the game. He plays the role of a customer, an MCM employee, and at the end of the game, the role of Edwin himself, or at least F10 seems to think he's Edwin in her final dialogue. The helper thing also calls him like Mr. Murray and stuff. This is something that F10 even calls out after Arnold activates Parachute.
Who are you deep down inside? Another worker bee? A bumbling bee? Perhaps a busy bee? In many ways, tonight has been a comedy of errors. A jester would suit you well. Or a bunny, running from danger, scared and stupid, searching for a hole to hide in. No, you did everything I asked until this point. You were an obedient dog, a good dog. Then you bit the hand that fed you.
So both Arnie and the Mimic take up roles throughout the game, a very interesting parallel. I've seen many people say that the Mimic's arc in this game is sort of finding his own identity, and I agree, and I also think that in a way, this is Arnold's character arc as well. Not in the sense of finding his preferred role like the Mimic, but in the sense of learning not to sort of just blindly follow Fazbear Entertainment's orders. Throughout the game, Arnold is almost as robotic as the animatronics he hides from, just doing his work, pretty much. Now obviously, he doesn't have much of a choice, but at the end of the game, he does have a choice between continuing to follow Fazbear Entertainment's orders, or take matters into his own hands by activating Parachute.exe. And if he chooses to continue following orders, he is punished by being fired, killed by the Mimic, and then possessing Freddy. Arnold even kind of says this, saying,
Fazbear Entertainment will hold you personally responsible for lost or stolen property.
What?
What did you expect would happen?
I did everything you told me to!
This is why I think it makes more sense if Arnold survived the parachute ending, since it would be kind of weird for him to die if he did the right thing. I guess you could argue he does still continue to follow orders with how he goes to Edwin's house when told to by F10, but I disagree, because first of all, he literally had no choice, and also wanting to stop the Mimic is probably something he would want to do by now. So I think his arc of still not following orders is kind of still intact. Or I guess you could say he wasn't just blindly following them in that case, I don't know. It's unclear why exactly Arnold would not just give up the data diver since he has been doing everything else he was told to all night. I mean, even F10 calls this out.
Arnold, why? Why would you come down here? You should have given me what I wanted and gone home. You did everything else that was asked of you. Why'd you change your heart?
It's my question too.
Why don't you trust me?
There's never a singular moment before this where we see Arnold reflect, he just kind of does it. I think it was most likely something that had been bubbling up for a long time, and after the events of the game, where Fazbear Entertainment literally sends him somewhere where he almost got killed multiple times, he decides to go against them. He also has been awake for 41 hours, and is most likely running on pure adrenaline, so he probably wasn't thinking straight. But what else Arnold's story shows us is that Fazbear Entertainment sucks even back in the 1970s. I think as much as he has an interesting character arc, his story is really just to show us oh, this is what it's like working for a company like Fazbear Entertainment, and that's always been a theme of the series, since FNaF 1 even. I mean, the night guards die all the time, and Fazbear Entertainment actively covers it up, and one of the founders is literally a serial child killer. So really his story just further shows us that Fazbear Entertainment was always horrible. But hey, that's just my interpretation of Arnold's story and character arc, and I think it is backed up within the game itself. If you've seen Gibby's video about the themes of Seeker of the Mimic, which I think is really good and I agree with for the most part, I think this fits in pretty well with it, but please let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, so now that the character analysis of Arnold is out of the way, let's talk about the theories now, which was probably why you clicked on the video in the first place. But before we get into all that, I just want to ask you guys to subscribe because we try and hit 3.5k before the end of the year, and subscribing will be a massive help. But only if you enjoy the video, and if you want to unsubscribe at any time, you can. With that, let's get into our first theory. This is perhaps the most popular theory for who Arnold is, and it has some solid evidence. There are quite a few parallels between the story of Cassie and Arnold. They are both sent to do a task, and throughout the majority of that task, they are talking with the Mimic, who's pretending to be someone they know. They also both fall through a vent, which is pretty minor, but still. They also both use a similar device. Arnold uses a data diver, and Cassie a Faz wrench. They are absolutely designed to be similar. Another parallel is that at the end of the parachute ending, Arnold escapes the Mimic through an elevator, and in Ruin, Cassie escapes the Mimic using an elevator. Also, the Mimic tries to reach through the elevator with its hand, it's not able to reach through. That's, a very intentional parallel. There's probably more parallels as well, but these are just the main ones. There's also the fact that Arnold has a Spring Bonnie bobblehead in his van, which could perhaps imply that he likes the character. And we know that Cassie's dad's favorite character is Bonnie. However, for a couple reasons, Arnold is most likely not Cassie's dad. First of all, it is heavily implied that Cassie's dad is the Bonnie bully from FNaF 4, with the Bonnie mask appearing in Princess Quest 4 in Help Wanted 2. It is said it looks familiar to the player. However, Arnold never sees this mask in Secret of the Mimic, which you think they would include if they were the same character. And I find it very unlikely that Mike and his friends are in their 20s during FNaF 4. Also, I find it unlikely that Arnold would continue working for Fazbear Entertainment for 50 years after Secret of the Mimic, since if he survived he'd be undoubtedly fired, or most likely not continue working with Fazbear Entertainment. It's also implied that Cassie's dad is named Jeremy, probably Jeremy from Help Wanted, and if you want to know why, make sure to check out my video about Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith, since I talk about it there. Furthermore, we know that Cassie's dad was a Fazbear technician, and in a way, Cassie is sort of a technician, since she fixes the animatronics in Ruin. It's kind of a stretch, but stay with me. And Arnold is a technician, so they could be like a family of technicians. Also, for the past 2 games, we have played as a member of Cassie's family, and we have seen them deal with the Mimic. Hell, Rune was our introduction to the Mimic in the games, so it would make sense for a prequel game all about the Mimic to be about another member of Cassie's family. And also, in an old version of the opening dialogue, Arnold says,
What family? My parents are dead. My wife left me last year. Oh God, I haven't seen my kid for...
This outright states that Arnold has a kid. However, it is unused, so it might no longer be canon to his character. However, the fact that it was originally a part of it is interesting. I suppose you could say that since Arnold never mentioned a child as a reason he does the workload that Fazbear Entertainment gives him, that could imply he doesn't have a kid.
No, I'm doing it because you guys keep threatening to dock my pay and repo my truck.
However, I don't really think so, since he could be worried about his pay potentially being docked because he has a kid that he has to provide for. He just never mentions it because Dispatch clearly wouldn't care. So overall, I think it's a very solid theory, and one that I believe. Now let's talk about our next theory, which is one that I find to be very interesting. This was a theory that I was actually pushing for since before the game came out. Before we can talk about this theory, we must first talk about David's death. We don't actually get direct confirmation on how David dies. It would be very easy to say that he dies by being hit in a van like he does in Tales. However, in the books, Fiona dies during childbirth, but she doesn't in the games, so we kinda have to figure out how David died ourselves. Unfortunately, like I said, we do not get direct confirmation, but we do get some hints. In the game, you can find a tape where Edwin talks about a playground he built for David.
Look, I get your concerns. I do. But they're all just groundless. This is the perfect spot for David's playground. I can watch him play while I'm loading and unloading freight, and he'll be under watch at all times out there. The loading dock is like 200 feet away, and there's a fence and everything. I know you're my lawyer and all, but there's no regulation that says I can't have it there, so just get off my back. Besides, David loves the new slide. It'll be fine.
So, Edwin is told that building David's playground near the loading dock is a bad idea, but he doesn't listen, and we kind of know the whole thing, so Edwin's neglect led to David's death. I wonder if David's death has anything to do with the loading dock, where vans are likely to be. Also, in the 4th Murray family tape at the end of the game, David is brought to his playground for the first time, and the final shot of this tape is David's ball. And the shot kind of lingers on it for a while. As we know, in the books, David got hit by a van chasing his ball. I wonder if this could be foreshadowing. Also, in the final tape, Edwin is at David's birthday party, and he says that David is on the playground.
Okay, everyone hide. Fiona, go get him. I left him out at the playground.
We can actually go to David's birthday in the game, and it's still set up, and we get a message that says due to recent events, the party will no longer be held. So, it seems that David most likely died on his 5th birthday, and he was last seen on the playground near the loading dock, which was called out to Edwin as dangerous, and the final shot of tape 4 is David's ball. David died in the books chasing the ball and got hit by a van. Vans are on loading docks, so David probably died in a very similar way in the games, as he did in the books, being hit by a van. Also, a bunch of YouTubers were given like a gift basket from Steel Wool, and this came with 2 vans, Arnold's van and another white van that never appears in the game. Why would they include this if it wasn't relevant to the game? Why does no one talk about this? So it seems very likely that David died by being hit by a van. How does that tie back to Arnold? Well, the very first scene of the game is him driving a van, and he says that he hasn't slept in 36 hours. He says he can barely keep his eyes open. As we know, you shouldn't drive if you're tired because it can lead to car accidents. David probably died in a car accident, as we just talked about earlier, so there could definitely be a connection there. It could definitely be like foreshadowing. So here's kind of what I'm thinking under this theory. It's possible that Arnold was like bringing stuff to MCM on David's birthday, and he was tired because he was overworked, just like he is at the start of the game. And then he accidentally hit David. And then he must have either painted over his van or they gave him a new van after he hit them, since the van that seems to have hit David was white while Arnold's is blue. This can explain why Arnold hallucinates Tiger Rock before properly encountering him in the basement. As we know, David likes the tiger plush, so he might have been holding on to it when he was hit. Maybe the hallucinations are Arnold's guilt creeping up on him, especially since he is literally in the place where he killed David. Hell, maybe the Tiger Rock boss in general never happens and it's only Arnold's guilt. Or it's David/his agony coming for him in particular, since as far as I'm aware, he's never actually mentioned any of the mail we can find in the game. Also, and this is a minor point, but David objectively has parallels to the bite victim from FNaF 4. Not only do their bedrooms look similar, but David has a favorite plush, like the crying child, and they both died in an accident, with both of them seeming to possess a version of their favorite plush. The reason I bring this up is because the main protagonist of the original FNaF story is Michael Afton, the one who killed the crime child, and he feels immense guilt over it. Could Arnold parallel Mike, both being protagonists who feel guilt after accidentally killing a child? Mike was even a technician in Sister Location, just like Arnold is in Secret of the Mimic. Also in Sister Location, Michael kinda also has a choice of following Baby's orders or going to the private room. However, unlike Arnold, he chooses to keep following orders because, it's his sister. So that could just be another parallel between the characters, showing how, they have similar situations they're in, because they kinda have like a similar history, but, they're different people and make different choices. There's also that one part where F10 kind of talks about like, oh, why didn't you trust me? Which is very similar to what Baby says in Sister Location.
You did everything else that was asked of you. Why the change of heart?
It's my question too.
Why don't you trust me?
Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you believe me?
So, it might be an intentional parallel there. It's a bit of a stretch, them paralleling each other, but I guess it is a possibility. The final thing I want to say is that perhaps the storytime ending could be Arnold redeeming himself, since in this ending we revert the Mimic back to the state of being David. So Arnold's pretty much bringing back the boy he killed in the first place. Now, there are definitely some problems with this theory. The major one being that Arnold, never mentions this, and neither does Dispatch, but I doubt he would give a shit. Why wouldn't Arnold mention it if, he killed a fucking kid at this place that he's going to do a job? The only idea I can come up with is that Arnold obviously just doesn't want to talk about it. I guess there could also be maybe, repressed memories stuff, but if that's the case, then it's really weird that, he never, fully remembers. That would be really bad storytelling. It also has been, 4 years, so I guess you could say he kind of forgot or, moved on. I don't think so. Maybe that's not a good idea. I don't know. Maybe you guys can come up with better ideas in the comments. And also, there is compelling evidence that M1 killed David, which I will link in the description to the Twitter thread that talks about it. So, it's definitely possible that M1 killed David instead of Arnold. So overall, what do I think of the theory? Well, I actually think I really like it, but I will say that if it is true, it's kind of weird that, it's never elaborated on. I think kind of the narrative would be a little bit worse if it is true, but I do kind of like the concept of it. I don't know, it's confusing. It's obviously weaker than him being Cassie's grandfather, but I could see it being the case, but I wouldn't say I believe it right now. But I do think it's pretty sensible and a valid theory. And with those two theories out of the way, I think we can finally come to an end. I definitely think these are interesting, but I'm really only confident in Arnold being Cassie's grandfather. I just want to talk about the Arnold killing David theory because I thought it was interesting, and it made for a good thumbnail, Let me know what you think in the comments, and make sure to subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you guys in the next video.